New Avalon was a city of stone and storms, a port city where the Atlantic hammered the docks with relentless fury. Inside the Brass Finch, the air was warm, thick with the smell of old bourbon and seared steak. Sloane Mercer moved through the supper club like water, a tray balanced on one hand, her mind miles away. She was a night shift waitress, but she was also a cartographer of survival. Tucked in her locker, beneath a change of clothes, was a binder filled with exit maps, hand-drawn schematics of every place she had ever worked. A skill born from her time as a wildfire rescue volunteer. She saw the world in terms of entry points, choke points, and escape routes. In the farthest booth, shielded from the main floor by velvet curtains, sat Luca Varan. He was a quiet presence, elegant in a way that seemed out of place, yet completely commanding. Sloane knew who he was, or rather, what he represented. Men like Luca did not dine alone. Sloane's eyes flickered to the hallway juncture near the restrooms. The guard detail had just changed. It was not a scheduled rotation. It was a swap. 2 men left. 3 new men arrived. The shift was subtle, too fast, and their suits fit poorly over rigid vests. Something was wrong. The main chandelier light stuttered, buzzing once, twice, before plunging the room into a disorienting flicker. In that pulse of darkness, the double-hinged kitchen doors burst open, not with the familiar crash of a dropped tray, but with the silent, purposeful swing of an invasion. 3 men, disguised in the green and white uniforms of a local delivery service, stepped onto the dining floor. They did not carry food. They carried long, black weapons, the muzzles finished with heavy suppressors. Panic was a rising bile, but Sloane's training was a cold, hard stone in her gut. She did not scream. She acted. She caught the eye of the bartender, Miguel, and her hand flashed a series of signals. A closed fist tapped twice on her temple, followed by 2 fingers swiped toward the floor. Kill the music. Code red. Exit A. Miguel understood. The smooth jazz cut off abruptly, replaced by the rising murmur of confused patrons. As the first suppressed thwip echoed, Sloane moved to the wall panel near the maitre d's station, ripping open the fire control box. She did not pull the full alarm. She slammed her palm onto the sprinkler test button for Zone 1. A fine, cold mist erupted from the ceiling. Not a deluge, but enough to spray across the attacker's line of sight, enough to make polished floors slick, enough to add a new layer of chaos that she could control. "This way!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the rising tide of fear. "Stay low. Move to the side exit." She was shoving a group of diners toward the velvet-roped emergency door when an arm snaked around her waist, a hard grip locking her in place. One of the attackers had broken from the pack, his breath hot and sour on her neck. "Going somewhere, little bird." Sloane let her body go limp for a fraction of a second, luring him into a false sense of control. Then she exploded. She drove her thumb hard into the cluster of nerves on his inner wrist, the Yuan Chi pressure point. His grip convulsed, fingers flying open in agony. As he recoiled, she pivoted, using his own momentum against him, and jammed the heel of her other hand upward, striking the Joshua point just below his ear. He dropped like a marionette whose strings had been cut, collapsing onto the plush carpet, unconscious before he hit the floor. Across the room, Luca Varan was not hiding. He had overturned their heavy oak table, creating a barricade, and was shielding 2 of the club's dancers who had been caught in the open. As he moved, Sloane saw the sleeve of his expensive jacket tear, a long, deep graze bleeding on his forearm. She grabbed her now discarded service tray, using it as a shield, and ran to him, skidding on the wet floor. "We have to move. The main exit is a kill box." Luca looked at her, his dark eyes assessing, surprised. He was clutching his arm, blood welling, without pausing. Sloane unwrapped the clean white service napkin from her waist, folded it into a tight square, and pressed it hard against the wound. "Hold that!" His hand covered hers, his skin hot. The contact lasted only a second, but it was electric. "Follow me," she commanded, not asking. She led them away from exit A toward the kitchens, but not through the kitchens. She kicked open a floor-level hatch disguised as a ventilation grate. The wine cellar. It exits to the alley. Luca herded the dancers in first, then followed. Sloane came last, pulling the heavy grate shut. She heard the click of the automatic deadbolt she had insisted the owner install last month, down in the cool, damp darkness, surrounded by racks of priceless wine. The muffled sounds of the attack above seemed distant. Sloane's training kicked back in. She fumbled in her apron pocket, pulling out a small stick of chalk she used for marking reserved tables. She knelt by the stone wall near the ventilation shaft and drew a sharp, white arrow, pointing away from the shaft, a habit from her wildfire days. Know the wind, know how the fire will travel. Minutes later, the alley outside was a flashing chaos of red and blue. Sirens screamed, drowning out the storm. The Bureau of Illicit Trade. The BIT was already on scene, their armored vehicles blocking the street. They were too fast, too prepared. Sloane scanned the area, her eyes landing on one of the subdued attackers being cuffed. His weapon lay on the wet pavement. Even from this distance, she could see the custom engraving on the receiver, a stylized oxa, a snake eating its own tail. That was not Luca's organization. That was not the Valco family, whom he reportedly served. This was a different kind of predator. Luca was breathing heavily, his face pale but calm. He was looking at her, not at the flashing lights or the federal agents. His gaze was intense, a mixture of raw curiosity and something akin to awe. "Who taught you to do that?" he asked, his voice low, just for her. Sloane finally allowed herself to shiver, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving only the cold. She met his gaze, the rain starting to plaster her thin uniform to her skin. "Nobody," she said. "I learned to survive." The whispers started before the BIT agents had finished tagging the evidence. New Avalon's grapevine, faster than any newswire, connected Luca Varan to Don Aurelio Valco. The Don was a shadow king, the unseen hand that balanced the scales in Harbor Light, the city's industrial heart. The rumors said Luca was Valco's right hand, his enforcer, his heir. But the attack at the Brass Finch did not feel like a simple robbery gone wrong. Sloane knew what a robbery felt like. It was desperate and chaotic. This had been precise. It was a message, and Sloane suspected the message, written with silenced weapons and oxa-marked steel, had been intended for Luca Varan. Sloane bypassed the police line, her waitress uniform a perfect cloak of invisibility, and slipped into the rain-slicked night. She walked the 12 blocks back to her attic apartment in Quartet Row, the wind off the harbor doing little to clear her head. Her loft was a single, cavernous room above a defunct print shop. Its walls were not decorated with art. They were covered, grid-like, with her maps, blueprints of concert halls, electrical schematics for government buildings, fire exit routes for every major hotel in New Avalon. It was an obsession, a fortress of knowledge. She unlocked the heavy deadbolt, her knuckles aching from the pressure points she had used. Inside, she crossed to a large, flat file cabinet. She pulled out her masterwork, a heavy, leather-bound volume she called her Exit Atlas. She added the quick, chalk-marked sketch of the Brass Finch's wine cellar to its pages. Her movements precise, almost reverent. This was her Bible, her doctrine. A sound broke her concentration, not from the door, but from the fire escape, the scrape of leather on iron. She did not reach for a weapon. She grabbed the heavy, cast-iron T-square from her drafting table. She moved into the shadows by the door, her breathing slowing, her body poised. The window creaked open. A dark shape vaulted over the sill, landing with a cat-like softness on her wooden floor. He did not turn on the lights. He stood silhouetted against the stormy city skyline. "You should really have a lock on that window. Sloane." Luca Varan's voice filled the small space, smooth and low, the tension from the club still humming around him. He was alone. No guards. A different kind of power play. "And you should know better than to use a fire escape as a doorbell," she retorted, stepping out of the shadow. She did not lower the T-square. He raised his hands slightly, palms out. The gesture was placating, yet he showed no fear. He was wearing a fresh shirt, a dark cashmere sweater, the jacket gone. "I came to offer an official thank you, and to cover the damages to the club, of course, for your boss. I am not his keeper, and I do not want your money." "No," he said, taking a step closer. The faint smell of antiseptic and something expensive, like sandalwood, reached her. "I did not think you did." "Who were they?" Sloane asked, her voice flat. She lowered the T-square, but did not set it down. "The men with the Oxa sigil, they were not there for the cash register. They were there for you." Luca's expression did not change, but a new stillness settled over him. He did not confirm or deny. He watched her, his gaze as intense as it had been in the alley. "You see a great deal, Sloane, more than most." "I see patterns," she said. "That was an execution team, not a smash and grab. They knew you were there. They wanted you, or they wanted to send a message through you." He walked past her, his gaze sweeping her walls, taking in the hundreds of hand-drawn maps. He stopped at a detailed cross-section of the city's main opera house. "You are preparing for a war." "I am preparing for a fire," and she said, "They are the same thing. In the end, a single event that changes everything." She finally set the T-square down. "Answers. Luca, that is what I want, not money." He turned back to her. He reached into his pocket, but it was not a weapon. He produced a single, heavy card, matte black and seamless, made of some kind of metal or ceramic. He slid it across her drafting table. It was blank, save for a single embossed address, Solstice Manor. Don Aurelio Valco is hosting his annual gala in 3 days, at his home, Solstice Manor. He paused, letting the name hang in the air, the Don's cliffside fortress, the most secure property in New Avalon. "My associates believe the security is adequate. After tonight, I have my doubts." Sloane picked up the card. It was cold to the touch. "What is this?" "A job offer," Luca said. "I need you to be a safety consultant for the event. I need you to see what they cannot. I need you to see the fire before it starts." Sloane looked from the card to his face. He was not asking her to be a waitress. He was asking her to step into his world, a world of dawns and execution teams. But it was also a world of maps, security, and escape routes. Her world. "I have one condition," she said, her voice firm. I expected nothing less. "I get full access, every blueprint, every staff roster, every security protocol. I have total authority to design the evacuation plan. And your men, Don Valco's men, do not interfere. They follow my maps." A slow smile touched the corner of Luca's mouth. It transformed his face, made him look less like a shadow and more like a man. Done. He moved back toward the window. "I will send a car." "I will find my own way," she countered. His smile widened. "Of course you will." He slipped back out onto the fire escape and was gone, vanishing into the storm as if he were part of it. Sloane stood alone in her loft, the black card heavy in her hand. The silence was absolute, until it was not. A faint, high-pitched whirring sound. It came from her main window, the one facing the street. Sloane's eyes narrowed. She moved slowly, grabbing the long-handled broom she used to dust her high ceilings. She saw it, a small, black drone, no bigger than her hand, hovering just outside the glass. Its tiny red camera lens was aimed directly at her. The Oxa, they were watching her. Sloane did not hesitate. In one fluid, violent motion, she thrust the broom handle forward, shattering the window pane and striking the drone square in its body. She rammed it again, a sharp crack as she pinned it against the brick, breaking its rotors. The red light died. The drone fell, a broken toy, 4 stories to the pavement below. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out, her heart hammering from the sudden violence. It was a text from an unknown number. "Do not believe the press release. Come to the manor before dawn." She looked at the shattered window, the broken drone, and the black card in her hand, below. The first official news alert lit up her phone's screen. The Baet's official statement, "Fire at the brass finch controlled. Investigation points to faulty kitchen equipment." A lie, a neat, tidy cover-up. Sloane knew then that the fire was no longer just a possibility. It was a promise, and she was walking right into it. Solstice Manor did not cling to the cliff, it grew from it. Sloane had arrived before dawn, the sky a bruised purple over the black, churning Atlantic. The house was a fortress of dark slate and shadow-paned glass, built to withstand the ocean's rage. Inside, it was a character in itself. The air was not warm like the brass finch. It was cool and ancient, tasting of sea salt, cedar smoke from a distant hearth, and the sharp mineral smell of the stone floors. The main hall was an atrium of glass facing the endless, churning dark. Sloane began her survey immediately. Ignoring the armed man who shadowed her at a respectful distance, Luca had given the order. She moved from the kitchens, a stainless steel labyrinth, to the grand ballroom, her notebook filling with flaws. "This is all wrong," she said, her voice echoing in the empty hall. Luca and a severe-looking woman with a military straight posture stood by the main staircase. "This system was installed 6 months ago," the woman said, her voice clipped, a clear dismissal. Her dark hair was pulled into an uncompromising bun, and her suit was tailored for function, not fashion. "It is outdated," Sloane countered, tapping a yellowed fire sensor box. "This is a residential-grade system for a commercial-scale threat, and this staircase," she gestured to the magnificent, spiraling oak structure, "is not a staircase. It is a chimney. A fire at the bottom will vent straight to the top floor in under 2 minutes." The woman's jaw tightened. Luca made the introduction. "Sloane Mercer, this is Marcella Trent, Don Valco's head of security." "A waitress," Marcella said, the word an insult. "And you are basing this assessment on what?" "On the fact that smoke and heat rise," Sloane said, refusing to be baited, "and on the fact that your only evacuation route is a death trap." She turned to Luca. "My condition was full authority. That means I identify the problems and you fix them." "And the solutions, Miss Mercer?" Luca asked, his eyes betraying a flicker of amusement at Marcella's barely contained fury. "We cannot rebuild a staircase in 3 days," Sloane said, walking to the massive, sea-facing windows. "So we create new exits. I want these marked as designated breakpoints." She pointed to specific panes. "Tempered glass. It will shatter clean. We need battery-powered directional lights installed at floor level, below the smoke line, leading to these exits. And I am redesigning the staff protocols." Marcella stepped forward. "My men are trained." "Your men are trained to stop bullets," Sloane cut in, her voice sharp. "My staff will be trained to stop panic. Fire is the enemy here, not just gunmen. And fire has allies confusion, darkness, and bad design." Luca held up a hand. "Hear her out, Marcella. Do what she says." Marcella looked as if she had swallowed acid, but she gave a curt, stiff-necked nod. "As you wish." For the next 2 hours, Sloane worked. She unrolled blueprints on a long mahogany table, her own exit maps for the event. She was not just drawing routes, she was choreographing a ballet of survival. She created a set of hand signals specifically for the catering staff, a closed fist over the heart for fire, a slicing motion at the elbow for evacuate west, a tapping on the chin for all clear. She assigned color codes to the service napkins. White meant stay and serve, burgundy meant a soft perimeter breach, and black meant a full, immediate evacuation. She was so absorbed in her work, in the lines and arrows, that she did not hear him approach. "It seems you are building a house within my house. Miss Mercer?" Sloane looked up. He was older than she expected, standing by the fireplace, a shawl draped over his shoulders despite the mild chill. He looked more like a tired professor than a mob boss, but his eyes were ancient and sharp. Don Aurelio Valco. He held a small espresso cup, and his hand was perfectly steady. Luca and Marcella, who had just returned, both straightened, their deference palpable. "Don Aurelio," Sloane said, her voice steady. He smiled, a thin, tired gesture that held no real humor. "You come into my home. You tear apart my security, and you command my people. You have more courage than most." His gaze drifted from her to Luca, who stood silently by the window. "It makes me wonder, are you here to protect my house, or are you here to protect my godson?" The question hung in the salty air, a test. Sloane met his gaze. She did not look at Luca. "Don Valco, I do not care about your house or your godson. I protect everyone who is in the house with the fire, because fire does not care who you are." For a moment, the Don's tired eyes hardened, assessing her, stripping her down to the bone. Then a low, dry chuckle escaped his lips. "Good," he said, and it sounded like a verdict. "A very good answer." He nodded once, turned, and disappeared down a side hall as silently as he had arrived. Marcella stared at her with open hostility. Luca, however, looked at her with something else. Something she could not, and would not, name. Later, as the first gray light of dawn broke over the ocean, Luca found her on the main terrace. The wind was fierce, whipping her hair across her face. "The catering team arrives in an hour," he said, standing beside her, his proximity a shield against the cold wind. "Show me." "Show you what?" "The signals." Sloane turned to him. "You are not a waiter." "But I will be in the middle of it. If your system is going to work, I need to know it." She nodded. "All business." "This," she said, tapping a fist to her heart. "Fire. Confirmed visual." He mirrored her, fist to his heart. His eyes never left hers. "This," she said, her voice a little softer, her hand slicing at her elbow. "Evacuate west. Use the breakpoints." He copied the motion. "And this?" he asked, his voice low, his fingers brushing the side of her chin in the signal she had created. All clear. His touch was light, barely there, but it sent a jolt of warmth straight through her. The space between them shrank, the salt spray and the wind fading into a dull roar. There was only the heat of his gaze, the faint scent of his skin, the unasked question hanging in the air. His breath misted, her own breathing hitched. A sound, sharper than the crash of the waves, a high-velocity crack. Instinct took over. Before Luca could even register the noise, Sloane's hand shot from his chin to the back of his neck, and she hauled him down. Down. A spray of stone chips erupted from the granite gargoyle just above where his head had been. A sniper, from the cliffs. They hit the hard slate terrace, Sloane half landing on top of him. His arm was tight around her waist, hers still on his neck. Shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, the adrenaline a sudden, violent fire. Marcella's voice crackled over a hidden earpiece on Luca, now audible in their sudden stillness. "Shot from the south ridge, triangulating. All teams, lock down the perimeter. Now." Luca did not move. His eyes locked on Sloane's, his breath catching hers. The warmth between them was no longer electric. It was explosive. They were inside in seconds. Luca pulled her through the terrace doors, his hand a vice on her arm, and slammed the heavy oak door shut just as Marcella's voice echoed from a hallway speaker. "Perimeter lockdown, all teams. Status." The adrenaline was a roar in Sloane's ears, a white-hot vibration that made the quiet of the map room seem suffocating. They stood in the warm, yellow lamplight, breathing hard, the storm and the sirens outside a dull, distant memory. "You are bleeding," Sloane said. Her voice was too sharp, cracking the silence. Luca released her, his own breathing ragged. He touched his cheek, and his fingers came away dark. A shard of granite from the shattered gargoyle had sliced a thin line across his cheekbone. "So I am." Sloane moved to the supply closet where she had stashed her work binders and a small first aid kit. Her hands, usually so steady, were trembling. It was not fear. It was the volatile, kinetic energy of a near miss. The physics of a bullet that had occupied the space his head had been in a fraction of a second earlier. She pulled out an antiseptic wipe. "Hold still." He was standing over her drafting table. looking at the map of the ballroom, but his focus was entirely on her. She stepped close, into his space, her arm brushing his chest. She dabbed at the cut, her touch trying to be professional, but the tremor in her fingers betrayed her. The smell of the antiseptic mixed with the scent of sandalwood and the faint, metallic tang of his blood. "This is not a normal hazard for a safety consultant," she murmured, trying to focus on the task. "It is for me," he replied, his voice low. He did not move, did not flinch. He just watched her, his dark eyes cataloging the way her brows furrowed, the way she bit her lower lip in concentration. The sniper shot had changed the air between them, stripping away the pretense of employer and contractor. She was the one who had saved him. He was the one who had brought the danger. "Idioxa," she said. It was not a question. He nodded slowly. "They are not part of the old world, Sloan. They are a cancer. They deal in commodities the Dawn will not touch, and they believe violence is the only negotiation. My family, the Varans, we were mediators. We kept the peace. Don Valco uses me as his negotiator now, but with the Oxa, there is no negotiation, only removal." He looked at the blood on the wipe in her hand. "They know the gala is a deadline. They are getting desperate." Sloan finished cleaning the cut and smoothed a small bandage over it. Her fingers lingered for a moment. "The contact, skin on skin, desperation," she said, her voice quiet. "I know what that looks like." She stepped back, needing the space, her gaze drifting to her own obsessive maps. "You see all this, the lines, the codes, the timing notations." "I see them," he said. "It started 8 years ago, Kestrel Ridge. I was in college, studying forestry management. I volunteered for the summer search and rescue crew. A wildfire broke containment. It moved faster than any model predicted, jumped a 300-foot fire break like it was nothing." She traced a red-inked exit route on her blueprint, but her eyes were seeing smoke and ash. "We were evacuating a small mountain lodge. We got everyone out. We thought we had everyone. But the head chef, he was an older man, stubborn. He went back, just for a picture of his late wife." Her voice went flat, the memory a ghost in the room. "I told him I would go. He knew the building. He said he knew the safe spots. But the wind shifted. It tunneled down the main hall. The roof collapsed. I had a map of the lodge, but I did not understand the building. I did not know how the kitchen's grease traps would act as an accelerant. I just knew the marked exits. It was not enough." She finally looked up at him, her eyes stark with the admission. "I dropped out of college the next week. I started studying structural architecture, fire dynamics, crowd psychology. I studied how people get trapped. I never wanted to fail to save someone again." Luca was silent for a long moment. He looked at her maps, not as drawings, but as pages from her life. He saw the precision, the obsession, the hundreds of hours spent charting paths to safety. "Your whole life," he said, his voice rough with a new understanding. "It is an exit map." He stepped toward her, closing the space she had tried to put between them. He did not touch her body. He raised his hand and gently, almost reverently, rested his forehead against hers. The contact was electric. It was more intimate than any touch she had ever known. It was a complete acknowledgement, a surrender. She could feel the steady, radiating warmth of his skin, feel the faint tremor of his own receding adrenaline. Her eyes fluttered closed. Her hand, the one that had been trembling, lifted. She did not command it. It just moved. She pressed her palm flat against the side of his neck, her thumb finding the strong, steady beat of his pulse. Thump, thump, thump. It was the rhythm of life, solid, real, here. He angled his head, his lips brushing hers, a silent, hesitant question. She answered by inhaling a slight, involuntary gasp that parted her lips. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of gentle exploration. It was deep and certain. A kiss born of adrenaline and a sniper's bullet, an affirmation of life in a house built on the edge of the world. His lips were firm and warm, moving against hers with a raw hunger that stole her breath. His hand moved from her cheek to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her to him. Her hand remained on his neck, her fingers clutching slightly, feeling the way his pulse jumped and hammered against her palm. It was breathless and desperate, a promise made in the quiet center of the storm. "If the fire comes," he whispered against her mouth, his voice hoarse. "We run together," she finished, the words a vow. The moment shattered, the map room door swung open, slicing the warm, amber-lit space with the cold, blue light of the hallway. Marcella Trent stood there, her face a mask of iron. She took in the scene in a single, scathing glance, their closeness, their ragged breathing, the raw intimacy of the air. "The perimeter is clear," Marcella said, her voice like chipped ice. "The sniper is gone, but he left a message." She looked pointedly at Sloane, then at Luca. This is a compromise. Feelings make you weak. They compromise decisions." Sloane did not step away from Luca, though the spell was broken. She looked Marcella dead in the eye. "No," Sloane said, her voice quiet but ringing with the conviction of Kestrel Ridge. "You are wrong. Not caring is what gets people killed. Caring is what makes you run back in. It is the only thing that saves anyone." Luca straightened, his hand dropping from Sloane's hair, but he did not move away from her side. He stood with her, allied. Marcella's lip curled in disdain, but she had a more pressing report. "The sniper was a distraction," she said, tossing a coiled, black object onto the map table. It landed with a heavy thud next to Sloane's blueprints, scattering her pencils. It was a grappling hook, attached to a 30-foot length of high-tensile climbing cable. "My team found this snagged on the lower fence line by the sea wall," Marcella said, her voice grim. "They were not trying to kill you. Luca, they were testing the fences. They were mapping the approach from the sea. They are coming. And they are not using the front door." The climbing rope was a declaration of war. Marcella's hostility was now secondary to the clear and present danger. The sniper and the climbing gear proved that Oxa wasn't just testing the perimeter, they were synchronizing an attack. The gala, Sloane realized, was not just a target, it was the stage. She returned to the map room, but this time she was not just looking at escape routes. She was looking for accelerants. She cross-referenced the gala's floor plan with the building's original architectural schematics, specifically the HVAC and ventilation blueprints. She studied the flow of air. The house was designed to breathe from the sea, pulling the salt air through its stone corridors. And then she found it, a critical, catastrophic flaw. The main engine room, housing the building's primary electrical panels and generators, was separated from the grand ballroom's wine cellar by a single, non-fire-rated, pre-war wall. A fire in the cellar would flash heat the engine room in minutes, cutting the power, trapping everyone in the dark. "It is a bomb, just waiting for a match," she said, her voice low. Luca had joined her, his presence a solid, warm weight in the room. "The match has already been delivered," Marcella said, her voice tight. She stood in the doorway, holding a crate of what looked like elegant, smokeless candles for the gala tables. "These were delivered an hour ago. My team just checked the manifest." She pulled one out. It was heavy. The order was for smokeless paraffin. This is a high-concentration fragrance oil, highly flammable. Marcella scraped the base of the candle with a knife, printed in the wax, so faint it was almost invisible. Was the telltale sigil. The Oxa. "Your logistics were compromised," Sloane stated, looking at Marcella. Marcella's gaze was steel, but her face was pale. "One of the staging companies, a driver, it seems we have an insider." It was a grudging, painful admission. The pressure was mounting from the outside, too. That afternoon, Don Aurelio Valco, in a move of calculated power, let it be known through his lawyers that he intended to formally transfer the operational rights of the Freepoint port, the lifeblood of New Avalon's shipping, to Luca Varan. The transfer was set for the day after the gala. The news hit the street and spread like wildfire, a clear signal that Valco was solidifying his legacy and cutting out his rivals. The Ox's desperation suddenly had a deadline. The counter-move came just as swiftly. A polite, formal summons was delivered to Solstice Manor by a stony-faced agent from the Bureau of Illicit Trade. It requested Don Valco's presence for a fiscal inquiry. The appointment was coincidentally set for 8 o'clock in the evening, exactly when the gala would be at its peak. "They're trying to pull him out of his own house," Sloane said, looking at the summons on the table. "They want him in a car, in transit, vulnerable." "He will not go," Lucas said, his voice flat. "But this is a setup. The Beat is being used as a tool, a way to create a distraction, a pincer movement." Sloane nodded, her mind racing. "They will hit you when you are distracted by the feds." She turned from the politics to the practical. She spent the next 3 hours in the kitchens, drilling the temporary catering staff, a group of 50 people. She lined them up. "No one shouts," she commanded, her voice cutting through the clatter of pans. "You listen, you watch, you use these." She showed them the signals. A flat palm swiped across the throat cut the gas. Both hands clasped and turned, as if locking a vault secure the valves. 3 fingers tapped on the shoulder moved to the rally point. She had them practice it, over and over, until the movements were crisp, automatic. While they worked, she installed compact pressurized carbon dioxide kits at every major heat station and in the hallway junction by the wine cellar. They were not a solution, but they could buy seconds. As she was finishing, Luca approached her. He was holding a small, professional-grade radio, the kind his security detail wore. "I need you connected," he said. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers. "It is a closed channel, only you and me." She clipped it to her belt. "What is my call sign?" "Finch 9, and he said, a small, private smile touching his lips, referencing the club where this had all begun. He tapped his own earpiece. "Finch 9, can you hear me?" He was only 5 feet away, but his voice suddenly filled her ear, a low, intimate murmur that bypassed all her defenses. It was closer than a whisper, a direct line. "Loud and clear, Luca," she replied, her own voice sounding too breathy. "Good," his voice came back, a velvet rumble. "Keep it on, always." That evening, with the gala less than 24 hours away, Sloane was reviewing the manor's original renovation plans from the 1970s, looking for hidden passages Marcella might have forgotten to mention. She found a name, written in pencil in the margins of a structural drawing Chamberlain. The notes referred to him as the contractor for the cellar and the ventilation shafts, a ghost. His name was on no official permit. She ran the name through a back-channel search on her laptop, a skill she had picked up from her fire investigation days. Nothing. He was a non-person. On a hunch, she accessed the manor's digital security archives, looking for guest logs from that era. She found a digitized photograph from a Valco family event dated 1978, a group of men standing by the newly built terrace, and there, in the background, was a younger, arrogant-looking Marcella Trent, standing next to a man with cold eyes and a builder's thick forearms. The man was labeled in the digital caption T, Chamberlain. Marcella knew him. She had known the contractor who built the cellar that was now the key to the entire attack. Sloane's blood ran cold. She closed the file. She could not trust the head of security. She had to create her own alarm. She worked for an hour, unseen, in the basement corridors, splicing a single low-voltage wire. She rerouted one of the new floor-level lights she had installed in the main hallway. She connected it to a magnetic sensor on the unauthorized cellar door, the one Chamberlain had built, the one that did not appear on any official blueprint. It was a simple trap. If anyone opened that door, the emergency light in the hallway above would not glow white like the others. It would glow blue, a silent signal, just for her. The jewels arrived first, a river of diamonds and silk flowing into the great hall of Solstice Manor. The storm had broken, leaving a clear, cold night, and the house was an island of light against the Black Sea. From the mezzanine, a string quartet began to play, the melody drifting over the polite murmur of New Avalon's elite. Sloane, blending into the shadows in a simple black pantsuit, recognized the piece The Nightingale Variations, a fitting choice, she thought. A songbird singing in a cage, just before the trap was sprung. She moved on the perimeter, a ghost in the machine. Her radio, clipped inside her blazer, was silent save for the faint, steady static of an open channel to Luca. Her eyes were not on the guests, they were on the staff. She saw a young waiter pause, overwhelmed by the crowd near the terrace doors. Sloane caught his eye and flashed a subtle signal, a hand gently pressed flat. A calming motion. Breathe. Hold your post. The waiter nodded, his shoulders squaring, and he turned back to his duty. Her silent orchestra was in tune. At precisely 9 o'clock, as fireworks exploded over the bay, Don Aurelio Valco stepped to the railing of the mezzanine. Luca was at his side, a perfect shadow in a flawless tuxedo. The small bandage on his cheek was the only mark of the war brewing beneath the opulence. The Don raised his glass. "My friends." His amplified voice was frail but resonated with power. "Tonight we celebrate a new era, a new promise for our city." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "We celebrate a safe harbor." The applause was thunderous. As it rolled through the hall, Luca's eyes scanned the crowd. He bypassed the senators, the judges, the shipping magnates. His gaze hunted, finally landing on Sloane as she stood near the service corridor. He did not smile, but his eyes locked with hers, a silent, binding contract across the crowded room. It begins. As the applause died, the grand chandelier buzzed, a high, electrical whine. The lights did not just flicker, they snapped off, plunging the hall into a sudden, terrifying darkness, broken only by the pale white emergency lighting at the floor. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Sloane felt it instantly, a shift in the air pressure, a thud, a mechanical sigh, and then silence. The high-pitched whine of the main smoke ejector fans, the ones she had inspected just yesterday, had stopped. They were choked off, locked down remotely. She was already moving. She turned toward the service hallway leading to the basements, her heart hammered against her ribs. At the far end of the corridor, the first of her newly installed floor lights was glowing. It was not white. It was a stark, cold, warning blue. The trap was sprung. The cellar door was open. "Finch 9 to Luca," she whispered into her radio, her voice urgent as she ran. "Blue light, cellar breach. They are inside." She rounded the corner, nearly colliding with Marcella Trent, who stepped directly into her path. Marcella's face was a mask of pale, rigid control. "Where do you think you are going?" Marcella demanded, her voice low and vicious. "The cellar," Sloane said, trying to push past her. "The sensor is tripped. The fans are dead. It is Chamberlain. Is not it?" "Your job is the guests," Marcella snapped, grabbing Sloane's arm in a steel-like grip. "The dawn is exposed. Get back on the floor and manage the panic." "Let go of me." As Sloane spoke, a low whoomph erupted from the cellar stairwell behind Marcella. It was not a boom. It was the sound of ignition, of oxygen being devoured. A wave of heat, smelling of chemicals and burning oil, blasted up the narrow stairs, shoving Marcella forward. The fire had found the path of least resistance. The salt air from the sea, drawn through the house's ventilation, met the accelerating fumes. The flames did not creep. They lunged. The grand staircase, the chimney she had warned them about, became a roaring vortex of fire, a liquid column of orange and red that shot 3 stories high in as many seconds. Panic, raw, shrill, and absolute. Sloane shoved Marcella against the wall. "This is on you!" She smashed the glass of the nearest fire control panel, ignoring Marcella's stunned expression. She yanked the manual override for the ballroom and kitchen sprinklers. A second later, a cold deluge rained down on the screaming guests. She turned to the terrified catering staff, huddled by the kitchen doors. She did not shout. She commanded. Her hand flashed the signal. Fist to heart fire. Slice at elbow, evacuate west. Point to the floor, stay low. Her training held. The staff, her silent orchestra, became her lieutenants. They formed human chains, grabbing guests, using the color-coded napkins, the burgundy, the black, to direct the flow away from the central inferno and toward the breakpoint windows she had designated. On the mezzanine, Luca heard her call just as the fire erupted. He grabbed Don Aurelio. Now! He shoved his godfather into the arms of two massive bodyguards. The garden, use the east terrace, do not stop. Go. As they dragged the Don to safety, Luca turned back, his eyes searching the chaos for Sloane. He pulled a terrified woman to her feet and shoved her toward the rain-slicked exit. And at that exact moment, the main gates of Solstice Manor burst open, not from the fire, but from the outside. A convoy of black-armored Bureau of Illicit Trade vehicles slammed to a halt on the pristine driveway. Agents, not in suits but in full tactical gear, poured out, carrying battering rams. The pincer was complete. The house was besieged by fire from within and by federal agents from without. Sloane fought her way through the smoke-filled service corridor to the small, secondary security office by the kitchens. She had to see the choke points. She slammed her hand on the console, punching up the camera feed for the engine room, the room that shared a wall with the now raging wine cellar. The room was already hazy with smoke, but the heat-resistant lens was clear. A figure was there, dressed in a heavy, fire-retardant coat. He was at the main control panel, systematically locking down the overrides, killing the water pressure, fighting her manual sprinkler pull. As if sensing her, the figure turned his head, looking almost directly at the camera. It was not an Oxa soldier. It was the man from the 1978 photograph, the cold eyes, the heavy builder's frame. Chamberlain. He was inside, and he was methodically, expertly, burning the house to the ground. Sloane kicked the security office door shut, the lock engaging with a heavy thud. The small room was an oasis of clear air, but smoke was already curling under the threshold like black, grasping fingers on the main monitor. Chamberlain's grainy image was still visible, a ghost in the machine, calmly moving to the next override panel. Marcella Trent stood frozen, her face the color of ash. "You know him," Sloane said. It was not a question. It was an indictment. Chamberlain, the contractor. He built the flaws into this house, and you let him in tonight. The silence in the room was louder than the roaring fire outside. Marcella's disciplined facade, the ironclad control, did not just crack, it disintegrated. She sank against the bank of monitors, her hands covering her face. "He had leverage," she whispered, the words broken. From before I worked for the Dawn, a recording, a mistake I made. He kept it for decades." She looked up, her eyes swimming in a terror Sloane had not thought her capable of. "He contacted me last week. He said it was just a demonstration, a calculated event." "Calculated?" Sloane spat, gesturing to the inferno on the screens. "He promised it would be contained," Marcella insisted, her voice rising to a hysterical shriek. "Just enough to discredit Luca, to make him look weak before the free point transfer. He said it was the only way to protect the Dawn from Luca's ambition. I thought I was making a trade, a controlled burn." Sloane's radio crackled. "Sloane, status. What is happening down there?" Luca's voice was tight, strained by smoke. Sloane keyed her mic, her eyes never leaving Marcella's. "She is here. Luca." It was Marcella. She let Chamberlain in. He's in the engine room and he is killing the overrides. She is the insider. A dead, cold silence stretched over the channel. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then Luca's voice came back, stripped of all warmth, a blade of pure ice. "Choose, Marcella." That single command was a sentence. Marcella's entire body went rigid. The terror in her eyes was replaced by a sudden, final clarity. The choice had been made. "He is locking the system," Marcella said, her voice now fast and professional. The security chief returning for one last op. "The main water pumps, the pressure overrides. I am the only one with the alpha-level biometrics to bypass his lockout. He cannot stop me at the terminal." "He will be waiting for you," Sloane said. Yes. Marcella pulled a small, heavy-duty fire extinguisher from the wall mount. Get the Don to the garden. Get him out. I will get you the water pressure. She did not wait for a reply. She unlocked the door and ran out, heading not towards safety, but straight into the black, superheated smoke toward the engine room. Sloane burst back into the main corridor. It was a new world. The air was thick and black, a suffocating, hot fog. The sprinklers were trying, hissing, but the fire, fed by the burning oils, was too hot, turning the water to steam. Breach, breach, South Terrace, a guard yelled nearby. They are coming over the cliffs. The Oxa. They were using the fire as their cover, scaling the seawall just as the BIT agents were trapped at the front gate. Sloane ignored the gunfire. That was a bullet problem. Hers was a smoke problem. She keyed her radio, shouting over the din. Luca Finch, 9 Delta. Execute Delta. Blow the sea doors. We have to reverse the wind. She did not wait for a confirmation. She saw a knot of guests, paralyzed by fear near the burning main staircase, choking on the toxic fumes. One woman was on her knees, hyperventilating, her breath coming in short, useless squeals. "You are not breathing!" Sloane yelled, grabbing her. The woman clawed at her. Sloane drove her thumb, hard, into the pressure point in the center of the woman's palm. The sharp, grounding pain made the woman gasp a real breath. As she inhaled, Sloane pressed a second point on her shoulder, forcing the panicked muscle to release. "Good. Again, breathe with me." She pulled the woman to her feet. "Form a line. Hold the person in front of you. We are going to the garden." She dragged the human chain through the chaos, shoving them toward the east terrace, where the air was clearer. Don Valco was there, his face streaked with soot, arguing furiously with his bodyguards. "I am not leaving," he roared. "There are staff still in the pantries." "They are out," Sloane lied, her voice raw. "I cleared them first, but you have to go. Now." "I do not run from my own house." Sloane got in his face, her eyes blazing with the same fire that was devouring his home. "This is not a house. It is a chimney. You are the pillar, Don Valco, and the pillar has to stand outside so the whole thing does not collapse. If you die here, you make Marcella's betrayal worthless. You make everyone's sacrifice worthless. Go." The old man stared at her, the truth of her words hitting him harder than the smoke. He looked at the home he had built, now a monument of flame. He gave a single, heavy, agonizing nod. His men grabbed him and half-carried him into the safety of the night. Sloane turned back, the smoke so thick she could barely see the exit she had just come from. She was alone in the inferno. Her radio crackled, a sound so faint it was almost swallowed by the roar. It was not a command, it was just Luca's voice, a desperate, private whisper on their channel. "Sloane, where are you? Answer me." "East Terrace," she coughed, her lungs burning, clearing the last group. There was a pause, filled with the static of his own exertion. "Sloane, do not do this. Do not become a ghost of the fire again. Kestrel Ridge is over. You have an exit. Take the exit, Sloane, please." His plea was a physical thing, a hand reaching for her in the dark. "Not yet," she whispered back. "There is still." She was cut off by a new sound, a low, concussive thump from deep within the manor. It was not a huge explosion, but a heavy, pressurized blast, the engine room. A second later, the weak hiss of the sprinklers above her head roared to life, a full, powerful deluge. The lights on the main security panel by the door, which had been red, flashed to a bright, pulsing green. Marcella had done it. She had unlocked the water. But Chamberlain had been waiting. He had stayed, and he had triggered his final failsafe, a small charge to burn the room, the evidence, and himself. Marcella was gone, but she had won. The water pressure, restored by Marcella's sacrifice, was a double-edged sword. It beat back the flames, but it mixed with the tons of ash and insulation, creating a thick, scalding fog. The air was unbreathable, a toxic steam that burned the lungs. Visibility was zero. Sloane was moving by touch, one hand on the wall, her internal map the only guide. She was heading for the central staircase, the main artery of the house, now a ruined, hissing skeleton. A solid shape loomed out of the gray, choking haze. "Sloane?" Luca's voice was a raw tear in the noise. He grabbed her, his hands finding her shoulders. They collided at the landing, a small island in a sea of smoke. The fire from the ballroom, though dampened, still pulsed with a deep orange light, illuminating them in a hellish glow. Their faces were near identical, streaked with soot, their eyes wide and white in the gloom. She did not ask if he was okay. She grabbed his arm. The one that had been grazed, the napkin she had tied there, was gone. She ripped the burgundy cloth from her own belt, the one that had signaled the evacuation, and wrapped it tightly around his forearm. Her movements efficient and rough. Her fingers immediately dropped to his wrist, pressing hard. His pulse hammered against her skin, a frantic, runaway beat. "It is strong!" she shouted over the din, her voice cracking. "But you are panicking. You need to match my rhythm. Follow me." She pulled him down into a crouch, her body pressing against his. "Stay low. The clean air is on the floor. We move together." She wrapped an arm around his waist, and his arm came around hers, locking them together, hip to hip. They were a single, four-legged creature, moving through the blinding smoke. The solid, radiating heat of his body was the only point of reference, an anchor of life in the suffocating steam. They reached the next landing, a wider space that was momentarily clear of smoke, only to be met by a wall of fire. The north corridor, her primary escape route, was gone, devoured by the flames. They were trapped. Luca let out a choked sound, a low curse, and shoved her behind him as a cascade of burning embers rained down. He stared at the inferno, his shoulders slumping. For a fraction of a second, he was defeated. And in that second, seeing the fight go out of him, Sloane's training vanished, replaced by a raw, primal instinct. She grabbed the front of his shirt, hauling him around to face her. "Hey!" He looked down at her, his face inches away, his eyes hollow with the trap. She could feel his heart hammering against her hand. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was not the warm, slow-burning promise from the map room. This was a brutal, desperate collision. It was all smoke and ash, the sharp taste of fear, the salt of their own sweat. It was a kiss of pure, undiluted adrenaline. His hand, no longer gentle, clamped onto the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her to him as if she were the only thing in the world that was not burning. Her other hand splayed flat against his chest, feeling the frantic, powerful thump, thump, thump of his heart. A wild drumbeat she felt in her own bones. It was not gentle. It was a raw, physical declaration. "You are alive. I am alive. We are not dying here." She broke it off, leaving them both breathless, their foreheads pressed together, breathing the same superheated air. "The north door is gone," she gasped, her mind already spinning, drawing new maps. "The east terrace. We can make the glass awning." Luca did not question. The hollow look was gone, replaced by a new fire. He trusted her. "You lead," he rasped. "I trust you." He turned, but she grabbed him. "Wait!" The pantry door beside them was rattling, being sucked inward by the fire's vacuum, pulling the smoke from their landing but feeding the inferno ahead. She grabbed a spent steel fire extinguisher from the floor and rammed the canister under the door, wedging it shut. The deadly draft stopped. They moved into the next corridor. A body lay on the floor. A young kitchen worker, one of the boys she had drilled. Luca did not hesitate. He bent, hauling the unconscious man over his good shoulder in a fireman's carry. They staggered onto the east-facing balcony. The cold night air was a shock, a blessing. Below them, the lawn was a chaotic strobe of red and blue. The bit agents were massed near the front, preparing a tactical entry, completely blind to the danger Sloane had mapped. "No!" she hissed, Looking down, a long, dark smear stained the grass. Fuel spilled from the Ox's abandoned cliff assault vehicles. It was pooling near the foundation. Invisible in the dark, the bit was about to walk into a vapor explosion. She fumbled in her pocket and her fingers closed around her small, steel flashlight. "Sloan, what are you doing?" Luca yelled, shifting the weight on his shoulder. "Saving those idiots." She stood at the stone railing, exposed to the night, and aimed the beam at the agent who looked to be in charge. She flashed the signal. A flat palm held out. "Stop." Then a slicing motion at her elbow. "Evacuate." Then she aimed the beam directly at the spill, circling it. Danger on the ground. The agent looked up, shielding his eyes, confused. Then he looked down. He shouted, and his men scrambled back. A sound like a mountain cracking in two filled the air. Sloan looked up. A massive, burning roof beam was tearing free right above them. "Sloan!" Luca's voice was a primal roar. He dropped the worker and launched himself, a solid wall of muscle slamming into her. He did not push her away. He shielded her, his body covering hers, driving them both back against the solid stone wall of the manor. The beam crashed down, an avalanche of fire, slate, and splintered oak. It pulverized the section of the balcony where she had been standing, shattering the stone railing and sending a plume of fiery debris into the night. Sloan was pinned, her face buried in his shoulder, the air knocked from her lungs. "Luca!" she gasped. "Luca, are you—" He groaned, a low, animal sound of pure agony. He had taken the hit, not the main beam, but a heavy chunk of the stone balustrade had caught him high on the left shoulder, crushing it against the wall. He tried to push away, but his left arm was useless. He slumped against her, his face pale and slick with a sudden, cold sweat. "I am fine," he gritted out. "The hell you are," she said. The rest of the roof was groaning, ready to follow. "We have to move." I cannot move my arm," he choked, the pain radiating, locking his body. "I know." Her voice was ice. She grabbed his injured bicep, her fingers digging deep, searching for the nerve cluster. She found it. She applied sudden, brutal, focused pressure. Luca roared, a sound of sheer, white-hot shock. "It is a pressure point," Moshi said, her voice clinical, ruthless, as she held the pressure. "It will override the pain. In 5 seconds, your arm will go numb. It will feel like ice, then nothing. But you will be able to move it." He stared at her through the haze of agony, his eyes wide with a kind of terrified awe. Then, just as she had said, the blinding pain vanished, replaced by a strange, heavy numbness. He could lift his arm. "You," he breathed, "are terrifying." "Get him," she commanded, nodding to the unconscious worker. "We are jumping for the awning." She grabbed his good hand, their fingers lacing tight. "On my count, 3. Fire raced through the Dawn's mansion. It was no longer a house. It was a living, hungry beast. The fire roared like a predator, a column of orange and white that had punched through the roof, turning the night sky a sickly, flickering red. The ceilings glowed, sagging under a heat so intense it felt like standing on the sun. Windows, one after another, exploded outward. A rain of superheated glass showering the lawns below. The sound was deafening, a constant high-pitched scream of metal twisting and ancient stone cracking. Sloan was on the second-floor landing. A small pocket of survivors huddled around her, the kitchen worker Luca had saved, 2 terrified caterers, and a dazed guest. The air was a black, churning poison. "We cannot breathe!" one of the caterers choked, clawing at his throat. Sloan ripped a dry chemical extinguisher from the wall. She did not aim it at the fire. That was useless. She aimed it at the floor in front of them, creating a short, 10-foot white corridor of powder. "Crawl," she screamed. "The powder will give us 5 seconds of clear air. Stay in the white." She tore a heavy velvet tablecloth from a ruined console table. "Grab this. Hold on, do not let go, no matter what." She put the dazed guest's hand on it, then the next, a human chain. But as they moved, A secondary explosion blasted from the hallway leading to the engine room. The blast was concussive, throwing them against the wall. This was not the fire, this was Chamberlain. "Luca," Sloane yelled, her voice raw. "Get them to the east balcony. Go. I will be right there." "Sloane, no." "That was the overrides. He is trying to kill the water again." She shoved him. "Go." She did not wait for his reply. She ran toward the explosion, her flashlight beam cutting through the new, acrid smoke. The engine room door was buckled, hanging off its hinges. Inside was a vision of hell. Chamberlain, his fire-retardant suit smoking, was at the auxiliary console, trying to shut down the water pumps Marcella had died for. No, Marcella was not dead. She was there, slumped against the main panel, a piece of shrapnel from the explosion protruding from her side, her blood a dark stain on the steel. But she was alive. She was holding a heavy wrench, and as Chamberlain turned, she swung it feebly, striking his leg. "You—" Chamberlain kicked her. A brutal, dismissive blow. "You should have stayed dead." He raised a heavy boot to finish her, but Sloane was already there. She hit him from the side, a low-angle tackle. But he was a wall, his heavy suit absorbing the impact. He grabbed her, his grip like iron, and threw her across the room. She crashed into the damaged wall panel, the air driven from her lungs. Chamberlain laughed, a dry, coughing sound. "The waitress, always trying to save people." He turned back to the console, raising a crowbar to smash the final controls. Sloane saw the buckled steel door, barely hanging. She saw Chamberlain's back. She saw Marcella, trying to push herself up, her eyes pleading. With a primal scream, Sloane grabbed the edge of the heavy, fire-rated door. She used her entire body, her legs braced, her back screaming, and used the one remaining hinge as a lever. She pulled, ripping the massive steel plate free. With all her weight, she swung it in a short, brutal arc. The edge of the door struck Chamberlain square in the back of the head. He crumpled, his crowbar clattering, and fell face first onto the smoking console, silent. Sloane staggered, her body screaming. Marcella was gasping. He failed. I kept the water on." "You did," Sloane said, kneeling beside her, her hand briefly, gently, touching Marcella's shoulder. "Bit," Marcella choked out, a bloody smile on her lips. "They are Oxa, Chamberlain. He was feeding them info. They are here, to seize the Don's assets. The port," she pointed to the console. "The log." Sloane saw it, a small, heat-shielded memory card in the sprinkler system's diagnostic port. It was not just a water log, it was a smoke routing log. It held the digital blueprint of Chamberlain's entire attack, which vents he opened, which accelerants he triggered, the precise, calculated pattern of the arson. It was the proof. She ripped the card from the slot, shoving it deep into her pocket just as Chamberlain groaned. "Oh, it does not matter," he spat, his voice muffled by the floor. "Bit will take everything, then you have nothing left. You lost." "Sloane." The stairs. Luca's voice was a roar of pure terror from the hall. Sloane turned. The entire central staircase, the magnificent chimney of oak, was collapsing in on itself. A slow-motion avalanche of fire and stone. The landing shuddered, and the north corridor, their last safe path, vanished, swallowed by a solid wall of falling debris. They were cut off. Sloane grabbed Marcella, pulling her up. "Can you walk?" "No," Marcella gasped. Luca was there, his face a mask of soot and fury. He scooped Marcella up in his good arm, his injured one hanging numb but functional. "What now? Mapmaker, where is the exit?" Sloane looked at the inferno that blocked their way. She looked at the east-facing windows, the ones that led only to the glass awning over the garden, a sheer 30-foot drop below that. It was the only way. There, she pointed. "It is a glass roof," Luca yelled. "It is tempered. It will hold if we spread the weight. It has to." She moved to the huddled group of survivors. She held up her hand, her movements sharp, precise, a beacon of calm in the chaos. She tapped her knee. "Kneel." She made a low, crawling motion. "Crawl." She held up 3 fingers. On the count of 3. They understood. "We go through the window," she commanded. "Stay low, crawl onto the glass, do not stand up." Luca went first, carrying Marcella, smashing the window frame with his foot. He laid her gently on the glass, which groaned and cracked under the sudden weight, but held. He crawled out, dragging her. "Next," Sloane screamed. The kitchen worker and the two caterers followed, scrambling out, spreading their weight. The bit agents on the lawn below saw them. Floodlights hit the awning, illuminating the scene. A few agents cheered, then started yelling, directing them to the edge. Sloane pushed the last guest out. She was alone on the landing. A new sound, a weak, terrified cry from behind her, back in the inferno. "Help! Please! I am trapped!" Sloane froze. She knew that voice. She turned. Her flashlight beam cutting into a small, adjacent room she had not cleared the Don's side library. The door was blocked by a fallen cabinet. Don Aurelio Valco. He had not made it out. Luca, already on the awning, saw her stop. He saw her face. He saw her look back at the fire. Their eyes met across the gulf of smoke. It was a silent, agonizing conversation. The mission was over. They were safe. But he was not. She turned back to Luca. The choice was made. Kestrel Ridge. The old chef. This time was different. "You get them down," she yelled, her voice a command that echoed over the fire's roar. "Get Marcella off the glass. I am going back for him." "Sloane, do not—" He was already crawling back toward her, but she held up a hand. "Stop." He reached the window ledge, his face a torment. He knew he could not stop her. He grabbed her, his good hand seizing her arm, and hauled her to him for a kiss. It was not a kiss of passion. It was an oath. It was short, brutal, and tasted of ash. His hand gripped hers so tightly it hurt. "I am right behind you," he said, his voice a low, raw promise. She pulled her hand free, leaving him at the threshold of safety. "I know," she said. Sloane Mercer turned her back on the exit, and together they turned and ran, two figures disappearing back into the heart of the fire. The library was an oven. Sloane followed the airflow, her hand held up to feel the faint pull of oxygen being drawn toward the fire. That was where he would be, by the crack in the door, trying to breathe. She kicked the fallen cabinet, the wood splintering, and shoved her way in. Don Aurelio Valco was on the floor, his back against the wall, his face a deathly shade of gray. He was not coughing, he was convulsing, his body starved of air. "Don, breathe," she yelled. He did not respond. She knelt, ignoring the burning embers falling from the ceiling. She remembered her training. A hypoxic victim. She made a fist, placing her knuckles on the center of his sternum, a critical pressure point. She applied a short, sharp, upward thrust. It was not CPR. It was a violent, neurological shock designed to force a spasmodic gasp. The Don's body arched, and he took in a huge, shuddering, painful breath. His eyes flew open, wide and terrified, locking on her. "Sloane," he rasped. "He is in here." Luca was at the door, his face a mask of soot, his good arm already reaching. "We have to go. The whole ceiling is coming down." "He cannot walk," Sloane said. She ripped her own blazer off, the fabric tough. "Grab his coat, spread it out, we are sliding him." They laid the heavy wool coat on the floor, rolled the Don onto it, and each grabbed a sleeve. They pulled, they ran, dragging the old man between them like a sled, his body bumping over the ruined, scalding carpet. The fire was a living, sentient thing at their heels, a wave of liquid flame that licked the corridor just seconds after they passed. Time was compressed to the narrow, burning edge of their escape. They reached the east window, the one leading to the glass awning. The air was clearer here, but the heat had fused the metal window frame. It was jammed. "It will not budge," Sloane grunted, pulling on the handle. Luca did not waste a second. He grabbed a heavy, upholstered library chair. His injured shoulder screamed in protest, but he swung it with his good arm, using all his weight. The glass did not break. The entire frame shattered, exploding outward. "Go, go!" Luca yelled. Sloane shoved a heavy, spent fire extinguisher against the low wall, creating a makeshift anchor point. "Don, you first slide on your back." The old man, dazed but understanding, sat on the ledge and pushed off, sliding down the angled, cracking glass. Luca followed immediately, his descent fast, using his good arm and legs to guide himself. The awning groaned, a high-pitched shriek of tortured metal. A spiderweb of cracks spread from where Luca had landed. It was going to fail. Sloane was the last one. She put her hands on the sill, ready to jump. The entire pane of glass beneath her feet gave way. It did not just crack, it vanished, disintegrating into a waterfall of sharp, crystalline shards. She was falling. A hand shot out of the chaos. Luca! He had lunged back from the edge, his fingers closing around her wrist in a grip that felt like it would break her bones. He held her. She dangled for one heart-stopping second over the 30-foot drop, the fire roaring at her back, his face a mask of primal effort above her. He did not pull her up. He pulled her over. He fell backward onto the wet grass, dragging her with him. Using his body as a cushion, she landed on top of him, the impact knocking the last of the air from her lungs. They rolled, a tangle of soot and limbs, onto the blessed, solid, soaking wet lawn. Rescued. Tactical geared agents were on them in a second, guns raised. "Do not move." "We have the Don," Sloane gasped, pushing herself off Luca. "We have wounded—" An agent, his face grim, recognized the Don. "Get medics now." They swarmed the awning, a chaotic but efficient rescue, retrieving Marcella and the others. As Marcella was stretchered away, her eyes met Sloane's. She nodded, a gesture of profound, painful gratitude. Her redemption had begun. Another agent, this one in a clean suit, his face pinched with authority, strode up to them. "Special Agent Thorne, who are you? What did you see?" Sloane got to her feet, her legs shaking. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, heat-scorched memory card. "You saw an accident. I saw a plan." She shoved the card into his hand. "This is the sprinkler system's diagnostic log. It shows the fire's progression, which vents were opened manually, and the exact timing of the accelerant ignition. It is a blueprint of the arson. Your man, Chamberlain, is still inside, and the Oxa cartel used your agency's arrival as a cover for their own assault." Thorne looked from the card to her soot-streaked face, his expression shifting from suspicion to a cold, dawning fury. He turned and barked an order. "Find him and secure the perimeter. I want the Oxa teams in cuffs. Now." Chamberlain was dragged out, burned but alive, his hands cuffed, the bit, realizing they had been played, dismantled the Oxa assault with ruthless efficiency. As the first, pale, gray light of dawn broke over the bay, the chaos began to settle. Solstice Manor was a ruined, smoking skeleton, but the fire was out. The sky was the color of a pearl. Sloane stood on the lawn, wrapped in a coarse fire blanket, watching the sun rise. She had survived. Don Aurelio Valco, his face clean, a medic tending to him, walked over. He was coughing, his voice a dry rasp, but his eyes were clear. He stood in front of her. "You saved my house," he said. "I failed," Sloane replied, her voice hollow. "It is gone." "Houses can be rebuilt," the Don said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Life cannot. You ran back. For me." He nodded toward the harbor, where the Freepoint port was just beginning to stir. "That port needs a new charter, a safety charter. Not guns, but plans, not muscle, but intelligence. I want you to run it." Sloane stared at him, stunned. Before she could answer, Luca was at her side. His arm was in a sling, his face pale, but his eyes were only on her. "Stay," he said, his voice low, "just for her. Stay in New Avalon, not as part of my world, not as part of anyone's." He gently, with his good hand, brushed a smear of ash from her cheek. "As an ally." Sloane looked at him. At the man who had run back into the fire for her, she saw the ghost of Kestrel Ridge, the old chef, and felt the memory finally, peacefully, let her go. She was not running from anything. She reached up, her own hand covering his. She did not smile. She just was. "I'm not looking for an exit anymore," she whispered. I think this is my entrance." In the cool, misty garden, with the smoking ruin of the house behind them, he stepped closer. His good arm came around her waist, pulling her flush against him. She leaned into his strength, her hands sliding up his chest, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone. He bent his head, and she met him halfway. It was a deep, lingering kiss, not of adrenaline, but of promise. It was slow and sure, acclaiming. His lips were soft, tasting of smoke and survival. Her hands moved to his bruised shoulder, her touch light, soothing. He held her tightly, his forehead pressing against hers, their breath mingling in the dawn air. They stood, two survivors. A silent promise whispered between them to build a safer city. The inferno was over. The only fire left was the steady, burning warmth they had found in each other. The epilogue was written in the months that followed. Solstice Manor was rebuilt, but this time, its blueprints were drawn from Sloan Mercer's Exit Atlas. The Freepoint Safety Charter under her command united the bickering port authorities. The Oxa, betrayed by their own hubris and Chamberlain's confession, were dismantled, and the Bit, humbled, quietly withdrew, their case against the Dawn dissolving with the proof of their own manipulation. The knots were untied, the ghosts were laid to rest, and the city, finally, truly, had a safe harbor. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below, share your thoughts, and connect with our community. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story and like this video. You can also show extra support by hitting that hype button, which helps this story get heard by more people.